What's up, guys? Welcome back to our amazing movie podcast. And today we're going to be talking about the movie Dial M for Murder.
Okay, well, welcome back, I guess.
Welcome back to the first episode of our podcast, a 2,000-part series.
Okay, well, so what do you want to speak about?
I thought you had the notes for what we were going to speak about.
I do. So,
What are you asking me?
Is directed by Alfred Hitchcock, Sir Alfred Hitchcock. And in 1954, it was his first film, which he recorded in 3 dimensions, which is pretty cool. Obviously, 3D had its massive breakthrough in 1953, so that was a year earlier, and this was like his contribution to 3D cinema, and it's pretty cool. And we didn't get a seat in 3D because we don't have a 3D TV, but
Terrible.
I watched some reviews on, and I also read some reviews on, how it's supposed to look like in 3D. So,
okay, we practically watched some.
There's some interesting parts that we can mention. Anyway.
Good.
So it stars Ray Milland. I believe this is the first time Hitchcock worked with Ray Milland. I'm not sure though. But Ray Milland was also already a star then because he already won an Oscar in The Lost Weekend. That was like a huge hit. In fact, was actually back then. Ray Milland was more known for The Lost Weekend than for Dial M for Murder. Like, if you'd ask somebody like a year after Dial M for Murder, everybody would say, "Oh, Ray Milland, that's the Lost Weekend guy," which he'd done 10 years prior. But nowadays we actually know him, like he's so much more famous for Dial M for Murder, of course, which is probably because Hitchcock is now just such a recognized director universally after he made films like North by Northwest, Psycho, and of course Vertigo, right?
I'm not sure if Vertigo is quite so good a film first.
Oh well. It stars Grace Kelly. Hitchcock worked with Grace Kelly 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Grace Kelly is a great actress. Some people like her more than others. I think she works in some films and sometimes is a bit, sometimes is a bit too perfect in others. But I think she's okay here, especially since Dial M for Murder is somewhat kind of a dreamy world. Everybody acts like a bit dreamy in Dial M for Murder. I don't know whether you agree with me there.
I'm not sure if I agree with you, but we can get onto that when we get to the plot section of our amazing podcast.
Yeah, and it also stars Robert Cummings, whom Hitchcock has already worked before, with whom he has already worked before in Saboteur. That was like 12 years earlier. Yeah, and he's doing pretty well. Robert Cummings is just so that you know, is the guy who, the lover of.
Okay.
Margaret. And John Williams, who is just such a joy to watch. He's the inspector. Yeah.
Who's Anthony Dawson?
Who's that?
Hang on.
I completely.
According to this, he is Captain Lesgate. Does that help?
Captain Lesgate.
Yeah.
Wasn't that like? I don't know. Isn't that like the name that Robert Cummings? Yeah, I think that was the name that like.
Oh, he was I think he was the murderer.
Oh yeah, that was Anthony Dawson. Yeah, that's what you said, right?
Maybe.
I think you said Anthony Dawson. Yeah. He plays. His name changed throughout his life 3 times.
Oh.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, okay.
I don't think Hitchcock has worked with him before, and I don't think he worked with him after. Again, I don't know. I guess I can look later. But anyway, the music is done. We can get to the music in a minute, but let's just talk about the plot first. Okay. So the plot is actually really good. I think the plot is actually one of the best parts of this movie. I think the plot is just so well made, and the screenplay, it just works so good, so well. So essentially, the plot is about.
You want me to help introduce the plot?
Well, yeah, sure. Like, we should probably say, like, oh, there's some spoilers now when there are some spoilers, yes.
Spoiler warning, guys. Spoiler warning. Do not continue if you
talking about the introduction.
have not watched Dial M for Murder, or if you are planning to watch Dial M for Murder, or if you've already watched the first 5 minutes of Dial M for Murder. Please do not
We're
continue.
gonna say spoiler
Pause the
warning again.
podcast now, and then go and like watch it now, and then come back to the podcast, and then continue listening to the podcast. Okay.
Yeah, well, you can go, you can. We'll say when like there's some actual spoilers because we're just speaking about the beginning, aren't we?
Well, yeah, but we're spoiling the beginning. Okay, at
Okay.
least go and watch the first 10 minutes of the podcast, guys. Okay.
Okay. Well, then go ahead and introduce.
Okay. So it starts with the main protagonist guy, and he's like, no, actually, it doesn't start with him, does it? Does it? No. It starts with like the woman and her lover, right? And like they are together.
Well,
And
no. Wait a second. So it starts with, okay, that's why I did the introduction. That's why I explained the plot. So okay. Now, to be fair, I watched the movie 3 times, so this was like actually a rewatch, and he watched it for the first time. So.
I promise I watched the movie.
But that's why you kind of forgot some of the things. It's your excuse. That's fine. Anyway, it starts with essentially the Margot, played by Grace Kelly, with her husband Tony, and they're sitting at the breakfast table, just sitting and eating, and then you can see Margot reading the newspaper, and then she sees, one newspaper column saying this ship arrived, and among the passengers on this ship is Mark Halliday. Yeah. And then you see like the ship, and you see the passengers coming out of it, and then you see Mark Halliday coming close up to the camera. So that is Mark Halliday. And then the next cut, you see Margot in the same room where she was before, so like in her apartment, and then Mark Halliday kissing. So essentially, Hitchcock very economically just shows she's married. She's married and she has an affair. Like he just shows this. He doesn't waste any time there because he really just wants to get on with the plot. And I think also the fact that you see a kiss with her and her husband and with her and Mark Halliday shows that like Hitchcock just really wants to get the romance out of the way. Of course, many people back then would expect a romance in a movie that was just always there. So therefore, he just said like, okay, I'm just going to get the romance out. I assume he just said.
From my personal point of view, I think that was definitely a very good choice by Hitchcock, and I think that definitely made the rest of the movie more thrilling and enjoyable, so we could focus on the core plot points instead of the fluffy romance rubbish. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. So essentially, he does the romance to show like, look, guys, I've done the romance, and then he gets it out of the way. Something similar that Stanley Kubrick does in Eyes Wide Shut. I'm not going to go into more detail there, but the first shot there, basically, everybody was expecting, seeing like the relationship between Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, and then he just does the first shot, basically getting that out of the way, and then he starts with his movie. And Hitchcock does something very similar here. Anyway,
Okay, so like, do we want to go into some analysis of this first scene? Like,
analysis of this first scene. Well,
I can't actually remember the scene very well.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's just like she's having an affair. Anyway, now you see this extreme long dialogue scene between Margot and her lover Mark, and she explains them essentially how they were always sending letters, and then she burnt all the letters, and she kept one letter in her handbag, and she always, she always kept it with her and everything. And then one day one day her handbag was stolen, the letter was gone when it was returned at the Lost and Found. And then she got blackmailed that she has to spend £50 to get the letter back. Okay. Then the husband goes back. Oh yeah, and Tony, the husband, he was a tennis star, and he stopped it about a year ago when all of that happened. Anyway, then you see Tony coming back, and the two leave, I believe, to the cinema or something, or like to some show, or I don't know, some entertainment. And then Tony dials the telephone and tries to reach Captain Lesgett, I believe. I think that's the name.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm Fisher, which is weird because his name is Tony Wenders. His name is not Fisher. So he says, like, my name is Fisher. And then he says, can you come to my apartment because I can't walk? I had a bit of an accident and I have to use a stick or something. I'm pretty bad at it. And then he gets
Can I pause you for a second? I
Of
just want to
course.
say like how like the actual idea of the blackmailer never being found out kind of starts to build up the tension in the plot.
What was never found out?
I like no, it was found out, but like at the start, how like they didn't know who the blackmailer was. Starts to build up tension. Like who could this person be? We never
Well,
was suspected who it actually would have been, which we can mention later on in the podcast. Of course, my
wait,
brilliant amazing
wait.
viewers.
It was found out in the next dialogue scene, though.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember. Was it actually?
Yeah. So essentially, he invites Captain Lesgood, and he says he wants to buy a car for 1100, so 1,100
I thought he
pounds.
wanted to get it for £1,000.
Yeah, he wanted to get it for 1,000 pounds, but Captain Lesgood was like, no, no, no. I'm very harsh. I'm gonna only get it sell it for 1,100 pounds, and yeah. And there are even some like really good screenplay moments where
Mm-hmm.
like
Like
okay, I
the
forgot the
stuff.
screenplay moment, but essentially where Tony says something like, "Oh yeah, let's see what a few drinks can do when we're arguing about the price," and the other person says something like, um,
Wait, what is screenplay?
"Well, screenplay is essentially."
For our viewers, of course, not for me, definitely
Oh,
not.
oh yeah, of course, yeah. So, dear viewers, the screenplay is essentially what the people are saying. So, what the different characters are saying. So, for example, in the play, you would see like here you probably see something like Tony, colon. Let's see what a few drinks can do. And then you can see in brackets, Tony stands up and goes to, I don't know, like his whiskey bar.
Ah,
And then you
what?
can see Captain Lesgett, colon. Well, I'm sorry, I hate to tell you, I am very good at arguing out the price, whether I'm sober or not, or something like that. I forgot the exact line. It was actually a pretty good line. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a shame that I forgot it. And then so that's the screenplay. And somebody has to write all of that out. Somebody has
Oh,
to
so
write
it's
all of
like
that out.
so. Yes, the screenplay is like the physical actions that the characters take out. My dear viewers.
Yeah, and what they also say. Um, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and the screenplay is actually pretty good. I think that really works for this movie. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, essentially, then they start talking about the car, and then Tony says something like, I've seen you before, right?" Actually, just that happens a little before, but when they meet, they kind of like, wait, haven't I seen you before? And then they realize that they were both in the same college, and then they actually see like an image of them both sitting at the same table. And by the way, you can see Hitchcock. That's his cameo. You can see his him in the image. It's one of his really cool cameos, to be honest. Like because he's not just somewhere like I don't know walking in the background. He's actually like in the image, which is kind of cool. Anyway, um,
And also, well, Tony obviously is doing some acting here, in character acting, because he has actually seen what is his name, Lesgate before,
yeah,
and he actually knew that, but he was kind of like acting it out a bit.
yeah, he was just completely acting it out. He was just pretending that he was doing that because he actually planned all of that. And essentially, they talk about how all of that, and they go through all of their their history. I don't know. And then Tony begins to tell him that he was the blackmailer, like the husband was the blackmailer.
Mm.
Essentially, he found the letter and then he kept it. And then he said, and then he's written the anonymous blackmail note in the hope that Margaret would go to him, to her husband and, confess everything. She didn't, though, you know.
Mm.
So he did all of that. And then, you can see, essentially the two speaking a little longer. And then Tony says, like, he would have, a year ago, he was sitting somewhere and then, he wanted, and then he had
I
the
remember
idea.
this bit. I remember this bit. He was sitting like in a cafe or something.
Yeah,
No, he was sitting in a barn, like he was drinking because he was feeling really bad after he found out about his wife and
yeah,
the other guy. And then he was thinking about how he could kill her. And he was going to do it up until the point when he saw Captain Lesgate walk past, like outside. And he decided against doing it. All with the purpose of setting up the perfect murder.
yeah. Yeah, and there's also this really cool moment where he says like, and isn't it funny to think that 1 year ago I would have probably killed my wife if I hadn't seen that thing that changed my mind. And then at that very moment, you can see Captain Lesgate, or like whatever you want to call him, Charles Swan, turning around to the ashtray, and then he said like, well, what was it? While he's like completely turning around to the ashtray, and then Tony says, well, I saw you. And then there's this really, really cool shot where you can see him, basically the back of his head, and then he turns around and looks like directly into the camera, like, you saw me. And that's really well made, because it just visually elevates his, how stunned he is. He just completely turns around. I don't know whether you remember that scene, but it's really, really well made.
Very vaguely. I did only watch it once, like a week ago or something. Actually, exactly a week ago from now. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's such a great scene, and then it really just the entire story begins to kick in, because then he basically starts to make this plan with the perfect murder, and said like, I planned that you kill my wife, and then he actually begins to like wipe off all of his fingerprints. Like, that's always a nice little touch. You can see him while he's speaking, he's beginning to wipe off all of his fingerprints.
I remember, like, for the first part when he was doing that, I was slightly confused until I realised kind of what he was doing. I think I was in the same position as Lesgate there, Captain Lesgate or whatever, Swan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the first time I watched it, I didn't even realize that he wiped off all of the things.
You didn't notice that? What did
No.
he was literally just walking up and wiping everything with a cloth.
Yeah, look, I'm extremely terrible at watching films, and I don't really understand plots. Seriously, like, I watched a film yesterday, and I like some of the things, I had no clue what it was about. Anyway,
Like when you watched The Hobbit and thought that Gandalf was bad. Anyway,
I
back
watched
to
Lord of the Rings and thought Gandalf was bad for like an hour of the 10 hours, because there was like, anyway, yeah, I'm not very good at watching movies. That's why I rewatched them. Anyway, you can see you can see yeah, you can see him wiping all these things, like wiping off the fingerprints, and then you can see, then he basically says, like, Swan says like, what if I go to the police station? Tony replies, well, I would just say that you're trying to blackmail me with letters that you stole from her.
Mm.
And then we remember, because he says like, the letters have your fingerprint, remember, or the letter has your fingerprint, and that's because the letter fell out of his wallet. He did that on purpose, so that Swan would like just take the letter, pick it up.
I
Remember
think
that?
he started like cleaning the fingerprints off before he dropped the letter, or whilst he was holding the letter.
I think he did that afterwards. Yeah.
I'm not sure, but like, yeah, I remember it was like kind of like I felt like there was something suspicious about how he was doing that,
How he was doing what?
like giving the letter. As I remember thinking there's something suspicious, like maybe it's because he didn't touch it with his own fingers.
Yeah, and he does that on purpose, so that it only has his fingerprints. Anyway, it's like, it's really well made, and then you can just basically see them argue out like how it would work, and there's also this really cool shot when they're planning the exact murder. Essentially, okay, this is like extreme spoiler territory now. I guess you should put on.
Oh yeah, spoiler warning, guys. Please
Yeah.
watch the movie now. Watch the movie.
Yeah, you should.
Watch the movie.
Okay. So essentially, you see them. You see them like at the telephone desk, and they're talking about the exact murder. And then he says, "Well, tomorrow night, you're going to stand here behind the curtain, and I'm going to call. I'm going to call the home. Margaret is going to stand up, go to the telephone, and you're just going to murder her. And then once you're done, just give a quick whistle into the telephone, and I'll redial. I'll be somewhere, and I pretend to dial the wrong number, and then just redial." And that would just essentially make it extremely easy for him to murder her without being noticed. So yeah, they plan making this murder plan, and it's and it has like, and it's just really cool in the way it's executed, and it's going to make it really safe for the murder and everything. It's no risk and everything. And then he shows, and then this really cool shot. He essentially, while he's actually telling the murder, you see this extreme high angle shot. So basically, the camera's at the ceiling and looking down. Do you remember that?
Not really, honestly.
So the camera's like at the ceiling looking down, and you can see him also like show the key, where he's going to put the key for him to come in. It's going to be like under the staircase carpet outside. And you can see this from an extreme high angle, and you can see them walking back and forth and everything. And then the camera, and then the telephone starts to ring. And that's like, you can clearly see Tony like, oh no, I haven't planned this. I've planned this entire thing for like a year now. I haven't planned the telephone ringing. You can see him kind of being a bit shocked. And then he goes to the telephone. It's his wife. He speaks with them, and while he's speaking with them, you can see the other guy, Swan, walking around the room back and forth, and you can see him turning on the lights, turning off the lights, looking how the entire thing will look like, and everything, kind of making up his mind. And then there's this really cool part, because essentially he's asked. There's another really great part where essentially, where he asks, "How are you going to ensure that I'm actually going to go through with it?" That's what Swan asks, and then Tony says, "Well, for the same reason why a donkey with a carrot in front of him and a stick behind him is always going to walk forward and never backwards." And then Swan asks back, "Well, what's the carrot?" And then he says, £1,000.
Money.
Yeah. And he's also going to pay £100 in advance. And that's also a really cool scene because the entire scene, like, it's 22 minutes long, this entire dialogue scene. It's like really slow paced, and you can see them, like, the camera's moving very little. And then there's one part where he throws the money across the room onto the couch. Do you remember that?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. And that's like the first action bit, and it's like this. It's so cool. It's just, honestly, it's so cool. It's this contrast, and then you can see, and then
I
you
found
can
it
see.
actually, I found it quite interesting though how, like, I didn't even notice it was such a long scene because I was so invested.
Yeah,
It was really, really drawing you into the story quite well.
yeah. Hitchcock is good at that. Remember? Anyway, and then you can see him picking up the money. That's the end of the scene. You can see Swan picking up the money, and you can hear this music in the background. There was no music the entire time in that scene, and then that's the first time we hear the music. And then you see a zoom into Swan, and then a zoom into Tony, and that's like how it ends. And by the way, nice little touch. Swan wanted to have 1,100, like £1,100 for his car. He now got £1,100 for the murder.
So was it 1,100? I thought it was
Yeah,
just 1,000.
yeah, it was 1,000 the payment, and he
Oh,
gave like an extra 100 in the beginning. So it's,
okay.
I definitely think that that's intentional. That
I didn't even notice that.
I didn't notice that either. I had to look at a review for that.
Oh,
Yeah, but anyway, that's pretty well made. And then the big night comes. You can see him. Well, then there's like a bit of speaking in, but essentially you can see how she's basically there and asleep, and telephone rings, and everything goes kind
wait,
of.
you skipped a bit. You skipped a bit. You forgot
Yeah,
about the bit like before all of that. Like it builds up a lot of tension. Like before
yeah.
they go, it's like Tony's meant to be going off with Mark, was it, to go and watch a film?
Yeah.
And like
To go to like eat.
yeah, to go and eat out and stuff. And his wife is meant to go stay at home,
Yeah.
but she said that she wanted to go out, and so that's the first kind of like problem in his master plan. Like he didn't predict this, and so he has to try and convince his wife, "Oh no, please stay at home. Why don't you do this?"
Yeah. Then just like, can you do cut out your newspaper thingies, or how they're called?
Yeah, I think they call it like clippings or something.
Yeah, he's like,
Or like,
you love doing your clippings, don't you? You
Mm.
love doing, like, Tony in many ways is like such an, like, he's so simple-minded about his wife. He doesn't realize that she's actually a living human being. Seriously, like, first he tells Swan, like, oh, she's gonna stay at home. She always listens to the radio at Saturday night. She always does that, like, as if there's never any breathing room. She always listens to the radio, like, so simple-minded. And then she's like later, you love doing your clippings. You always love to do your clippings. Like,
and I also found it like that was like the first thing his problem, which he just barely managed to fix. Then
Yeah.
he struggled to actually get her key away from her to go and put it under the carpet for Swan. Like
Yeah, and there was this really suspenseful scene where he's essentially taking it out of a bag, and then he has it behind his back, and she's trying to get it out of him. And then, do you remember that?
Yeah.
And that kind of mirrors the scene in Hitchcock film Notorious. There's also a really good key scene. Like, in fact, Notorious is a great scene. Is a great film, and there's also like this entire segment where the key constantly builds up one suspense scene after another, and it's so good. Anyway.
And then just as he's going, like he struggles because of like where Mark was standing, he struggles to actually get the key into the right position under the stairs. And so he has to leave and then say, oh yeah, I need to go back quickly. So he can actually go and put the key in the right place.
Yeah.
And so already we see like his perfect murder plan is starting to fall apart. And we also just before that too, we see like a bit of foreshadowing with how what is his name?
You forgot like everything in the other scenes, and everything in this.
No, the thing is, Mark said like, I don't think that like the perfect murder can
Yeah.
actually work. As unlike in a story where everything plans out and goes as expected, in real life something will go wrong, and that's proper foreshadowing for what happens basically, or what is happening at that point in time. Just a couple extra things before they leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that is pretty cool. Where you can see him like foreshadowing here and there.
And then if I continue now with the plot, as he's said a lot of the previous plot, you find that?
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, so then Mark and Tony, they go off to dinner, and the wife, who I keep forgetting the name of,
Margot.
Margot, she stays at home, everything's going well. And
Yes,
then at dinner, the thing is, his watch stops working at dinner.
yeah.
So this is the time. And so as Swan comes in and goes into the actual apartment,
Yeah.
he has to wait there and gets like, it builds up suspense. It's like the phone isn't ringing and he doesn't know what to do really. And this is the one key moment, but spoiler warning, which kind of ruins the whole thing. As in the time that he's waiting, he decides to leave just before the phone rings. To go, he puts the key back, goes out of the room,
Yeah, well,
and
we
then the
don't know
phone.
whether he puts the key back. He doesn't show
Oh
that.
yeah,
And actually, Hitchcock is so, but we realized that later that he actually did that. I guess
yeah.
this.
Sorry, but my mic kind of had to be switched here so we could get rid of the annoying rustling noise that was going on as it was recording from my headphones. So the audio is going to change from here on. And this is added afterwards, so the audio is also changed again. Sorry about all of this, yeah.
Hitchcock is really, really clever in the way he actually builds up the suspense, because what he does is he always goes to the very extreme to make even more suspense. Essentially, not only does his clock stop, but you can see you can see Swan standing there and waiting, and then he decides to leave. And then instead of actually us seeing like how he leaves and then quickly goes back into the room again when the phone actually rings, you can just see him like exit the room. Then you can see Tony walking to the telephone booth in his like I don't know in his cafe or something, and then you can see somebody already standing in the telephone booth. You're like, again, no, just come on, just get out of the telephone. Like everything is going wrong, and then you can see the person in the telephone booth just taking his time, and then leaving the telephone. Tony runs in, dials the number,
Mm.
and there's also this really cool thing where you can actually see his finger like
Yeah,
going
he
into the
dials.
dial number, and
He dials the number. He dials the letter M on the
Yeah.
telephone.
By the way,
is where the
actually,
movie
Hitchcock
gets
wanted to
started.
get such an extreme close-up from that dialing moment that the camera physically couldn't get so close to the dial, right? He physically couldn't, cameras back then. So what he had to do is he had to make like a huge dial, and the finger, I don't know, like the index finger that he used had to be like a huge plastic finger.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. Okay.
Neither did I. But Hitchcock liked to do that. Also, like Notorious, but what was that? Which was the film that I was speaking of before. He also does that several times, but just uses like a plastic hand just so he can get a better close up. Anyway, you can see him, dial the number, and then you see Swan standing in the hall, hearing the phone ring, and instead of us seeing him run back, he just cuts away to Margot. So we don't know whether Swan is actually going to go through with it, and that's just so extremely intense. You can see Margaret going to the phone. You can see her saying like hello 1,000 times, which is like, first of all, nobody does that, but it improves the suspense, so I'm not going to complain. Like she says hello, like genuinely, like for like half a minute. She's hello, hello, hello. Yeah, I think you get the idea. Like she does that for half a minute, which is so
And it really
unrealistic, but
builds up.
also so good.
It really builds up tension in the scene.
Yeah.
Like,
And
as
then
we
you can see him with a cloak in the background, and then he begins to. Do you want to continue, or do you want me to continue?
well, he begins to kind of like inch his way out with like the stockings
Yeah.
in his hand behind her, and then he goes in to actually go and choke her after like quite a long time, quite a bit of hesitation.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of like a fight going on as she's trying to choke her.
Yeah.
He's kind of basically trying to kill her, and she's trying to not die, I guess. And she has her scissors left on like the table from when she was doing her cuttings before.
Yeah.
And she picks them up and stabs them straight into his back.
Yeah.
And then as he falls down, you see that the scissors go straight into his spine and like kill him.
Yeah.
And she's left there like kind of really quite terrified and disturbed, and goes back to the phone, and if I remember correctly, it's like she actually talks to
Yeah,
Tony.
everything goes wrong.
And,
She actually hears that Tony was the person who called and that he was the person who never like answered in the first half minute. Like everything just goes wrong there. Like you genuinely like. And by the way, that was the one scene in 3D from what I've heard. Is because many people in 3D movies. Have you ever watched a 3D movie, Malachi?
like once 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know whether you remember, but there are always things flying into the camera and flying into you, and like there are things like there always spikes into your face or something, so that you kind of get shocked in 3D. And that's what 3D directors like to do. I don't know. Do you remember something like that?
Not really, honestly. I was very young. I haven't
Anyway, like
watched
whenever you watch a
3D.
3D movie, like whenever I watch one, you can see that Hitchcock doesn't do it that at all, except for that one time in Dial M for Murder where she reaches out for her scissors and she kind of reaches out into the camera. She like really goes into the camera there, and like her hands like it. And that's supposed to be like this one moment where you really see the 3D working. And she
But sadly, we didn't see that as we didn't watch it in 3D.
yeah, oh well. Anyway, yeah, and then she kills him, and there's this part where he falls on the floor, and then he falls with his back down, and you can see just about how he kind of crushes down into the scissors, and the scissors go even deeper into him. Do you remember that? Like how he falls with his back on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
floor?
that's what I said. Like, it kind of went even deeper into his spine, and that's when he died, basically.
Yeah, and that's just like again, that's just so disgusting how like Hitchcock just doesn't stop at just her putting it into his spine. He actually has to show like how it's going even deeper when he falls down. It's like
Mm,
um
yeah.
yeah, and then yeah, and then of course everything went wrong, and when Tony came home, he has to frame Margot that she murdered him. That's of course like he wants to get rid of her, so he has to frame her. He has to do everything in his power to actually, you know, make her seem like a murderer. And then he just goes to all lengths. He takes away the cloak, like that was used to strangle her, and puts in her stocking so that it looks like
Hmm.
she did that. And he hides the other stocking under the desk mat, which is really we're gonna come to that later. He then
Hmm.
kind of takes the blackmail notes and puts them into a swan. I don't know. I don't know how that works in the story. Like,
Yeah, so
you
it's kind of
remember
like to suggest that he gives the blackmail notes to Swan. Wait, spoilers again for further on, but to kind of frame it so that he came there to kind of try and blackmail her.
Oh yeah, and then that she
He frame
murdered
it
him.
so it looks like she murdered him to go and stop
Yeah.
it, and that's also why he swapped out the stockings so that she could be using one
Yeah.
of her own stockings to go and make it seem like she tried to frame him, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, what else did he do? He went and took the key, what we believe to be the key to the front door, from Tony, and
Yeah.
then goes and puts it back into her purse. And that's quite an important thing to know because he takes it from him, and he struggles to find it for a bit, but eventually finds a key that he has and gives it back to her and puts it in the purse. And what else? He burns the other stockings too in the fire.
Yeah.
I can't remember what else he does.
Yeah,
But
he basically just frames
doesn't
her
make
for
sense.
murder, and he goes to all lengths, and then while the inspection, like while everybody's inspecting, he puts down, a tray of drinks, and he puts them on the desk in a way so that the stocking under the mat is revealed,
Hmm.
and then you can just see that that's just the last shot before the intermission, where you can see him walking away from the mat as if he hadn't noticed anything, and then you can hear just in the background like, "Hey, look, Inspector! Here, look here!" Yeah, and then you can. There's the intermission. I would say definitely a very near perfect first half of a movie. The second half is still pretty good, but I don't think it um
Hmm.
gets back. It is as good as the first half. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed both parts, but I think the first half was so good at building up tension.
Yeah,
Like I don't think
yeah,
I'd seen anything quite as good, and it kind of keeps upping the levels, and with things going more and more wrong in Tony's master plan in the foreshadow. I think the first half is amazing. The second half's thoroughly enjoyable, but it's not quite the same.
yeah,
It's like kind of
yeah.
more trying to figure out
I
what
fully agree.
happened instead of seeing the tension of what is happening.
Yeah, the second half is like very different. As you can see, essentially in the second half, I'm not going to be able to talk about every detail because it's so extremely like it's. I watched it a week ago. We watched it a week ago, and it's so confusing. Everything you kind of understand when you're watching it, but it's like such a complex plot, and it's really one of those movies you have to watch it when you're like awake and where you can really mentally concentrate on the movie. It's not one of those that you can just watch like as entertainment in the background, because there's so much
yeah.
happening with the key and
A
everything.
very important point is that on the phone, like when she goes and realizes, oh yeah, it's Tony on the phone. Tony tells her not to call the police
Yeah.
before, and so that's like a slight issue. And so like after the intermission the next day, she kind of goes and says like Tony tells her to go and say that he didn't tell her not to call the police. Basically, yes, so as not to draw suspicion to himself and to make her look more suspicious. And as she trusts him and doesn't suspect him of doing anything wrong, she's like, okay, sure.
Yeah, it's like, and then you can see all of those dialogue moments in the second part, and it's also like really interesting. It's essentially general procedural drama where you can see the inspector coming in, played by John Williams, who again I think he's absolutely amazing in this one. You can see him just talking to them and thinking, and then like figuring out what different ideas and everything, and it's so cool. And
do you remember like the exact like narrative that went on?
Well, I remember some of it.
Okay, do you want me to go through like some of the things that kind of like I remember specifically from this?
Yeah. I don't know how much time we have to like
Maybe.
actually go through the entire part of the procedural, because that'll take like another hour. But
Well, I guess if I go and start, I remember how it was interesting that he was definitely trying to frame it so that it seemed like he came in through the garden, but as the inspector comes back the next day to go and interview like Margot and Tony and people, and the inspector says that that wasn't possible for him to have come in through the window because it would have left mud all over the carpet, and that he must have come in through the door somehow.
Yeah.
And so Tony's trying to think, oh, how can I go and frame this in a way that doesn't make me look suspicious? And so he kind of suggests that she let them in without explicitly saying that, and that's the conclusion that the inspector draws too.
Yeah.
What else happened? You can go on, actually, what I think.
Well, you could see essentially that then he's making this entire idea where Tony's essentially saying, well, of course, like he probably had his own key. He probably stole the key when he stole the handbag a year ago. He stole the key, he got a duplicate, and then he got his own key. And then he came in using his own key. And then the inspector's like, yeah, sounds good. That's probably it. Except that it's probably not it, because why wasn't this key on his body? Like, that's one of those moments, like, everything works, everything sounds perfect, and then, wait, but something's missing here. Or, well, yeah, something's missing, quite literally. The key is and
what else? Yes.
And then essentially the inspector actually gets quite suspicious of Margot because she tells several lies, and then he says like, okay, when you're actually going to be in court, say the truth always, because I'm going to forget what you said. And this is really where you realize, oh no, she's actually going to be in trouble.
Yeah, as like he sends her Tony off outside somewhere, the inspector does, and then goes and asks Margot about the letters that he found on Swan's body, and like kind of that's when that scene kind of happens, and he says, okay, I'll forget everything you said today, all of the lies and stuff, but you need to be truthful in court.
Yeah.
And like,
and the courtroom drama scene, did you like that? Sorry, I just cut you off. You like that? Did you like the courtroom?
That was one of the few scenes that wasn't actually in the room. It was quite okay. I need to actually remember. Yeah, I remember we kind of just see her face like kind of going, and we hear like the noise of the court going back and forth.
Yeah, and you can see essentially the entire movie is very logical. It's the filming is very precise, and Hitchcock really has his precision. He always shows things that he wants to show, etc., etc. The courtroom drama scene is just like a colorful, huge mess, and I think that's intentional. You can see essentially all of those colors on her face, and you can see people speaking to her like almost in a satire-like way, like, "Do you pronounce the how do you call it, the person guilty or not guilty?" Like they're so extremely, everything's just like a nightmare, and that's what it's supposed to be. And then essentially the verdict is guilty, and she's going to be killed, executed. Yeah.
And so.
Then there are loads of scenes, and do you want to go into detail with them, or do you just want to...
Wait, what was the next scene after it? I can't...
Well, essentially you can see Mark saying look, Tony, we've got to save her, and I've
Oh
got this
yeah,
idea.
okay,
And then
I
he
remember this
simply
now.
makes up the story exactly the way it happened. So you invited the murderer, and you told him to murder her, and then
Mm.
you called Margot, and then it's like
Well,
exactly like everything that has happened just to
every
save
single
her.
thing is exactly correct except for one small detail where the key was hidden. As
Yeah,
instead of where it was, which is under the stairs,
yeah,
he goes and thinks, oh yeah, and you put the key up here, and you need to go back, like on top of the door frame.
yeah,
So he's trying to convince Tony to kind of go to the inspector and make this massive claim, and he says, no, 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 that wouldn't be believable. Nobody would ever believe it. And he doesn't want to do this, obviously, because he wants his wife to be killed, to be
yeah.
executed.
And
Because
then the
that's his
inspector
mission
comes
goal.
back in again, and he seems to agree with Tony. Yeah, nobody would believe that. But when Tony's gone, he's like, he actually also has his own plans, and he also has his own idea. And then there's this entire part with this key, because then he kind of pretends to drop his key, although he hasn't. And then he kind of
I
switches the
think
jackets.
I
He
think we should
switches,
go over the inspector part slightly more in detail. Is that
well,
he's definitely coming back and being he's very suspicious of Tony, but he
yeah,
tries not to act that way. So he comes back and says, "Oh yeah, we're just looking into you in regard to a case of some money being stolen
yeah,
from like a bank and something," and asks if she has anything to do with it. And that's because like he's been spending the money that he was going to give to Mark himself in little chunks.
yeah.
And the inspector found this quite suspicious and went back to go and talk to him about it, and was also using it as an excuse to try and help save Margot. Is that up to that point, I think the inspector's quite against her and quite against her case
Yeah,
until
but he actually is in favor of her, like at that point already, and that is because he found out that the key that went to her, like in Margot's handbag, doesn't actually fit into their apartment. He wanted to go in once, and it didn't fit in. So he was like, "Wait, what happened there?" And then he noticed that was the key to Swan's, the murderer's girlfriend, or something like that. Um, and then he was like, "Oh, wait a second, what happened now?" He looks outside, and then after like looking for half an hour, he finds the key in under the carpet. And by the way, we don't see that. He just like
mm,
we see how he
we
explains
kind of
that.
we
Um,
kind of get it pieced together over the
yeah,
course of the film. As I remember, like only kind of starting to get it a bit more and more after the inspector goes and tries to explain the things.
yeah. And then he essentially swaps the jackets between uh like himself and Tony, so that he tricks Tony so that Tony doesn't have his key anymore, which was in his jacket. And then Tony goes out, and then he does this really cool thing where he essentially um where he lures
Um,
Margot to her apartment.
he doesn't really lure
Well,
her. He kind of like asks her to go back, doesn't he?
yeah, well, yeah. And then her key doesn't fit in, and then he wants to find out whether she knows that the key is under the staircase carpet, because if she does, then she's the murderer. If she doesn't, then she's innocent, or at least she
I
forgot.
think we should also point out here that what's his name? Mark, sorry. Mark's actually in the room with the inspector with the lights closed, and they're kind
Yeah,
of waiting, and the suspense builds as they kind of
and
wait to
there's
see
this
if
cool
he
visual
does
touch where
anything.
he puts his torch onto the key, where everything's dark, and you see that like just this little light circle around the key. Do you remember that?
No, not at all, honestly.
Like he essentially puts his torch onto the keyhole. Anyway,
Oh
um,
yeah, they actually I kind of remember that.
yeah, that's so cool. And then isn't able to go in, and then she comes in through the back door, and then they ask her like, "Do you really not remember where the key was?" etc., etc. And then she says no, and she's essentially pretty much shown to be innocent, unless she's like really senile or something.
Mm,
Because she doesn't know where the key is, and if she were the murderer, she would know where the key is under the staircase carpet. And
mm.
then they get her handbag with the key back to like the police station. They told Tony you can get her handbag there, and
And
then
that's why Tony went off
Tony
to the police
Tony
station
tries.
first, to go and collect her stuff. They send him off to the police station,
Yeah,
and then when Tony comes back, I'll go and take
yeah. Well,
over.
his key first of all doesn't fit in and then he
Yeah,
goes
and
back to this police station again. You want to continue there?
yeah. So he comes back and his key doesn't fit into the
Yeah.
keyhole, and so he's quite confused. Or does he not? Actually, no. He doesn't have to.
Oh yeah, the first time he doesn't have the key, and then he goes back to the police station in order to get Margot's key.
Mm-mm. And when he finds out that that key doesn't fit in, he gets quite confused. we see him kind of thinking it over, and he walks outside. It looks like he's about to go away, but then he thinks it over more and more, and it starts to build up suspense as if he just walks off and they have no evidence against him,
Yeah.
and so they can't prove Margot's innocence, and so she'll be executed. Then he realizes his mistake, which
Yeah.
was at the time he had taken Swan's own home key and put that into Margot's purse, and that's why it doesn't work. And he realizes what he'd done wrong, and he goes back through, and he takes the key from his hiding place, and that's what incriminates him. He opens the door, goes in, all dark, and he turns the light on, and then he sees everybody looking at him.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the peak of the. That's kind of like where the mystery ends and the peak of the film happens.
The first time I watched this film, I really hated the ending where he is essentially like kind of laughing and just saying, "You want a drink or something?" I really hated that. The second time I watched it, I kind of liked it more. And the third time I watched it, I just think it's so well made. I like the ending.
Why did you hate it? I quite liked it.
Yeah, I don't know why I hated it. It just kind of interrupted the suspense in my opinion. But now that I watched it again, it's really well made. And the last shot in the film, do you remember the last shot? Because it's great. It's so nice.
Wait, you'll have to remind me. What was the
Essentially, a mystery is solved, and the inspector calls the police station again. And then while he's waiting for the police to come through, he takes out his comb and combs his mustache. It's so I like that. It's just so sweet. And that's like the mystery is solved, and you can comb your mustache again. I like that.
Yeah, I think it's a very satisfying film in the end.
Yeah.
If we go and move on to like what I think of it as a whole, I know you have a very different interpretation, but I definitely didn't like Tony so much. I didn't think what Margot and Mark what they were doing was very good, but the Tony's plan to kill her kind of started me off, even though he's the central protagonist, kind of starts me off like thinking about him quite negatively. And I guess to some extent you could say that this is, in the typical sense, you could say it's like a tragedy kind of stereotype of film, not in the normal sense where like you get a super emotional connection to the main protagonist, but like the main protagonist is shown off to be bad, and you kind of see his downfall.
I think I like. I mean, during the entire murder plan, I was definitely in favor of Tony. I wanted him to go through with it. Of course, the minute actually it goes wrong, I'm in favor of Margot because I guess like her on-screen presence when she begins to like when she's hurt and she is like begins to cry and everything, where you feel for her, but while she's gone the entire time, you can't really feel for her because she's not on the screen. So that's why I'm definitely in favor of Murderer. I think that was.
I had the opposite interpretation. Is like I thought Murder is kind of bad, you know. I'm not really in favor of Murder, but I guess that kind of shows two different interpretations of the film. Is that you do really get it from his perspective. Only at that point in time, you do kind of really see it from his perspective mostly at that time. So I can see how you can go either way, but Murder's kind of bad in my opinion.
Well, it is bad, but yeah. So a couple of other details. I think we've gone through most of the plot. A couple of other details. The music. I really like the music. I don't know whether you remember it. Like most of the music is kind of just 1950s charming music. But then there's one scene like throughout the entire murder sequence where you hear these two notes and it's just so suspenseful. Do you remember that? Like.
Not really. I feel like a good musical track is one that kind of sinks into the background. You don't really notice it still adds to the movie, and that's what it was like for me. It's like when I actually thought about it, it was like, oh, the music's nice, very enjoyable kind of music.
So a good musical track is one that you forget.
What, sorry?
So in your opinion, a good musical track is one that you kind of forget?
Not necessarily, but it can often be very good. Like if it blends in super well with the film, one way that the music can be good is if you don't notice it because it just suits the film so well. I think for a lot of the movie that's the case. I also only watched it once, and like you watched it like 50 times, so like, I don't remember it as well.
Yeah, well, anyway, the music is made by Dimitri Tiomkin, I believe. I think that's the way you pronounce his name. He worked with Hitchcock on so many films, including Dial M for Murder, I Confess, which was the last one I watched before Dial M for Murder, which is also just great. And he also worked with him there, and he just has like his musical style. But let's see, Shadow of a Doubt, Strangers on a Train, I Confess, and Dial M for Murder. These are the 4 films he's done with Hitchcock. And like, of course, Hitchcock, the music in Hitchcock films would be like the ones that would be more known as the one where he worked with Bernard Herrmann for good reason, because Bernard Herrmann is genuinely such a brilliant musical composer. You can see him in Vertigo, which is just has a haunting score, North by Northwest, which has a really like nice adventure score, Psycho, which has like the most iconic scores of all time. That would be Bernard Herrmann. But Dimitri, whatever that name was,
Dmitri Tiomkin.
was like he also was he also worked with Hitchcock several times, and he does it pretty well. Also, by the way, do you want to say anything else about the music? Because I have another point.
No, I don't remember it too well, honestly, so
Okay.
I don't have much more to say.
Dial M for Murder is, according to the American Film Institute, the 9th best mystery film ever made, or at least out of the American films. The American Film Institute have all of these lists, and they always take American films because it's the American Film Institute, and it's the 9th best. And I love this mystery list because it has basically the top 10 best mystery films, and 4 out of the 10 are Hitchcock films. So of course I like it.
I definitely did think it was an amazing mystery film, though.
Sorry.
It's probably the best mystery film that I've kind of watched. I think that's not saying very much. So I haven't watched very many mystery films, but still, it's thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah, I was just like, you're like, the best one you've watched out of the one mystery film you've watched.
Yeah, out of this, like Cluedo or something, I don't know. That I watched
essentially like this is number 9 according to the American Film Institute. Hitchcock has also number 7, North by Northwest, and number 3, Rear Window. And literally, the American Film Institute says the best mystery film ever made is number 1 is Vertigo, and I agree with them. It's great, but
I do not agree. I didn't like Vertigo very much, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah, that's a story for another day.
Too much romance.
Sorry?
There was too much romance in Vertigo.
Yeah.
This, I think, more focused is purely on the plot and kind of like the ideas of what's happening.
I've got a question. Did you like Grace Kelly?
Grace Kelly. She was the
Margot.
Yeah.
Margot guy.
I think, she was definitely a very good actress.
Yeah, she was such a huge star back then. She was in High Noon, Great Western. She worked with Hitchcock on Rear Window. She worked with Hitchcock on this. Then the next film they worked on was Rear Window, which is so iconic. And then they worked on
To Catch a Thief.
To Catch a Thief. Yeah, how? Okay. To Catch a Thief. And again, that's again with Hitchcock and everything, and with Cary Grant. Like Cary Grant, he's amazing. And it's like, and she has such a great on-screen presence, and she's always so great to watch. She sometimes is a bit too perfect, as I said. Like Rear Window, sometimes she is just too perfect for my taste, but she's a great actress. Unfortunately, like 2 or 3 years after this, when she was just like this huge Hollywood star, she married like the Prince of Monaco or something like that, meaning that she was not allowed to go to Hollywood anymore because she was the Princess of Monaco, and then she had to basically commit to her like princesshood or something. I don't know. She couldn't do films anymore. Yeah, kind of sad.
Yeah.
And then she died very early in her life, like when she was like 50 or something, with a car crash.
That's quite sad.
Yeah.
But I mean, she is definitely a very good actress. I definitely found it interesting, like actually looking at her character again, going back. I guess I'm going back to the plot again, but I remember how it was interesting how her character in the film, like after she finds out about all the murder stuff, she couldn't really feel sad about it until it was all over. I think that's just another thing, like how the emotions hadn't really caught up to her.
Yeah, she's a great actress. I also really like Ray Milland. I think Ray Milland is just amazing. I watched him in 2 other films, Ministry of Fear. I watched that film twice, and Easy Living, and he's always great. I like him. I really like him.
Ray Milland was like the main character.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, and some people say they don't like him as much. Some people say they don't like him as much. I really, really like Ray Milland. I think he's such a good actor. Hello, Mark. Is there anything else that you wanted to say?
No.
Let's see. Was there anything else I wanted to say?
I honestly think we've covered most of it. I think overall is definitely my favorite Hitchcock film that I've seen so far. Was North by Northwest, was that like a Hitchcock film?
Yes, that was a Hitchcock film.
I enjoyed that too, but I think I did prefer this. This was definitely probably my favorite Hitchcock film.
I like North by Northwest, but I find North by Northwest overrated. I hate to say it. I like
North by Northwest was thoroughly enjoyable, but this definitely does a better job, in my opinion, of building up tension in like the movie and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why I gave North by Northwest an IMDb rating of 8 out of 10, and this a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, so did I, actually. So did I.
We agree. And then Vertigo, obviously, like a 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, whatever.
Yeah, I gave Vertigo a 10 out of 10 because it's literally my 3 favorite films of all time. Anyway, yeah. So I think we've kind of talked about everything that we have to talk about in terms of Dial M for Murder. It's a pretty good film. You should watch it. Well, we
Would
kind of spoiled
recommend.
everything. If you're still listening, well,
Oh, yes, spoilers for the ending.
yes, totally. People will know that now. But okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So thanks for watching the podcast, guys.
Thanks for listening to the
Make sure
podcast.
to like it
And
on
like it.
on like wherever we're uploading this, Napster or whatever. Make sure to subscribe to our MySpace accounts. I don't know, and just have a good day.
Yeah,
Thanks
and
for
follow us
watching.
on Letterboxd. Definitely follow us on Letterboxd.
Yeah, sure.
I'm Leno Geno.
Yeah, and I honestly can't remember, but yeah,
Malachi the Great, which is a lot.
Malachi the Great.
Malachi the Great. Anyway, yeah. Well, see you, and if we ever make another.
Yeah, see you for part 2 of our 200-part series. Thank you and goodbye.
Okay, well, bye.